Hello, everybody. Hello. How are you all doing today? A little bit slower of a chat today. What are we doing today? We're, the Primogen, right? We're literally just reacting to articles today. Whatever stuff you want me to read, check out, give my opinion on, you can send it in Twitch chat, I guess. But besides that, I don't really have much of a plan for today. Kind of feels mostly the same like yesterday. Wait, since when did Limit add actual other TTS things? What do you mean? He's stealing content and milking viewers for content? We've reached this point. Yes, exactly. I've ran out of content. I don't want to do coding streams anymore because they're like so boring for you guys to watch. So we're trying something different. We're going the Primogen route until we get something working. Get this man some help. Jay Ison broke him. Jay Ison's just taking so long to complete, man. To get to a state that I'm actually happy with. I have an article for you, by the way. Oh, send it in chat. Hold on, check it out. Also pretty tired today, so not going to be doing too long of a stream because I want to catch some sleep before my tournament later today. Ooh, an Anthropic article. You can't accept your own Tangia sounds? Yeah, I have no idea how the Tangia extension is gonna work. Probably have to get another mod to approve it for you. Yeah, okay. What is this article about? No, I guess this is kind of like practice for me to start reading properly because I'm so shit at reading. I don't know if you're like the same thing as me, but I have such a short attention span when it comes to looking at words on a page. It's sometimes like I can't even go an entire word without forgetting what the word was even saying. So it takes me a long ass time to read articles and to read books and stuff. That's why I don't read. I remember back in high school, whenever we would have like book clubs and whatever, oh my god, I would spend forever just trying to finish like one chapter or something. It would take me like, I'm pretty sure the stat that I would always use is like 1 hour for 5 pages in a book. So in order to like make it on time to read all of the book in time for the book club, I would have to read in and out of class like 12 hours a day just to finish like 3 or 4 chapters. And I would always get yelled at by my teachers for reading in class, even though I literally like need that time to read otherwise. Same, I'm skim. I skim. Trying to find answers to coding has broke my brain. Oh my god, so true. Like, when it comes to like tutorials or even figuring out how to code stuff for the first time, I always just go to videos because my attention span is just too short to read, even like ChatGPT outputs and whatever. Let's give this a try. Let's see how we do trying to read out this article. Alright, so this is about building effective agents. Is this just like a guide or something? I guess we can see it. It's also a pretty long article. Okay. Alright, let's see. What are they on about here? Oh, I just would leave class saying I'm going to school, the school counselor, but then get soda and a bagel. Yeah, but you see, the thing is, you aren't doing like stuff where you actually need to know the technical stuff, right? I don't exactly know what you're going to be doing in the future as like your main day job or whatever, or if you're just going to be a multi-moderator or something as a full-time job. Like, if you're doing technical stuff like this, you kind of can't skip classes, or you have to learn on your own at some point. All right. We've worked with dozens. Oh, should I turn off the music? I'm going to turn off the music because I can't concentrate on reading otherwise. All right. We've worked with dozens of teams building LLM agents across industries. Consistently, the most successful implementations use simple, composable patterns rather than complex frameworks. This reminds me of something. Fucking Project JEI is the most complex piece of shit, overly complicated piece of shit I've ever written. You're doing welding, you can't skip those classes. You can skip yours in comparison. I mean, just don't weld over your hand, right? No, I get what you mean. Over the past year, we've worked with dozens of teams building large language models, agents across industries. Yep, Anthropic stuff, right? Consistently, the most successful implementations weren't using complex frameworks or specialized libraries. Sounds like LangChain is like being thrown in the gutter. Instead, they were building with simple composable patterns. In this post, we're sharing what we've learned from working with our customers and building agents ourselves, and give practical advice for developers on building effective agents. Lux, I feel like you gave me this just because I'm overcomplicating Project JAISN by a fuck ton. Is that the reason? I don't blame you if that's the reason, because like I kind of need an article like this if that's the case. What are agents? Agents can be defined in several ways. Some customers define agents as fully autonomous systems that operate independently over extended periods, using various tools to accomplish complex tasks. Others use the term to describe more prescriptive implementations that follow predefined workflows. At Anthropic, we categorize all of these variations as agentic systems, but draw an important architectural distinction between workflows and agents. I don't know. The concept of agents, as I know it, or at least how they teach it inside of my AI class, is basically like just something that interacts with an environment, right? So I guess workflows or any sort of algorithm really can be an agent, but I don't know. Let's see. How do they distinguish workflows and agents? Workflows are systems where LLMs and tools are orchestrated through predefined code paths. Okay. And agents, on the other hand, are systems where LLMs dynamically direct their own processes and tool usage. So this is basically just like hard-coded destinations or whatever. But this agents are allowed to explore their environments and stuff like that, which kind of is like part of the definition. Lux says kind of, but also just as a good thing for on agents, lol. Okay. Below, we will explore both types of agentic systems in details. In Appendix 1, Agents in Practice, I guess I'll read that. We describe 2 domains where customers have found particular value in using these kinds of systems. When and when not to use agents. I mean, okay, let's just see what they have to say about agents over workflows. When building applications with LLMs, we recommend finding the simplest solution possible and only increasing complexity when needed. Fucking plugins, anybody? Always jumping the gun and trying to implement more than we actually need? Project JEI in the moment. This might mean not building agentic systems at all. Agentic systems often trade latency and cost for better task performance, and you should consider when this trade-off makes sense. Okay. When more complexity is warranted, workflows offer predictability and consistency for well-defined tasks, whereas agents are the better option when flexibility and model-driven decision-making are needed to scale. For many applications, however, optimizing single LLM calls with retrieval and in-context examples is usually enough. For many applications, however, optimizing single LLM calls with retrieval and in-context examples is usually enough. I guess in the context of like LLM agents interacting with their environment and that's all you care about, then sure. But if you're looking to get feedback from the AI in terms of the kind of response, in terms of the results that you're getting back, such as in the case of J.E. Ison with her MCP calls, for example, optimizing a single LLM call isn't really possible because you do need this kind of like pre-stage with the tool calling, and then you actually get the results of that to be used inside of a response for proper feedback and whatever. So I don't know. Optimizing single LLM calls with retrieval and in-context examples, sure, I guess. But yeah, I guess that's kind of like the point. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of applications that, or a lot of scenarios where you don't really need an agentic workflow or an agent to interact with your environment. A lot of it can be hard coded and just navigated through fuzzy finding or just better semantic rules. But I guess that kind of goes against your point of simplicity and whatever. But I don't know. I kind of do feel like rules tend to be simpler and easier to debug and whatever. AI is just like unpredictable, and the only way to really like verify AI outputs is with another AI to verify the AI. So it becomes like this cyclic paradox, or this like, yeah, this cyclic paradox of just LLMs trying to verify each other until you reach some sort of root of verification or whatever. That's just kind of like one of the pitfalls of using AIs, I guess, for any sort of workflow. You don't really have a good way of testing or verifying them without that's like outside, that's like within the traditional means of testing normal code. So when and how to use frameworks. There are many frameworks that make agentic systems easier to implement, including LangChain and LangGraph. We've done this before. Amazon Bedrock's AI agent framework. I've never actually heard of this before. Rivet, I've never heard of that. Vellum, I've never heard of that. This is a drag and drop GUI LLM workflow builder. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Wait a second, I want to check that out. Rivet. Rivet AI. A visual programming. It's like drag and drop blocks. It's Scratch programming, but for AI devs, for the vibe coders. You know, when I was originally thinking of what Project JEISON would look like, when I had the concept of plugins and everything, this was kind of like what I was thinking. I was originally thinking to myself like, oh, I we're gonna have all these plugins and their inputs and outputs they have like a set input and output, but where they're positioned within the pipeline isn't really defined. And so they're kind of like each plugin is like a block where you can drag it around and place it elsewhere in the pipeline. That was kind of like the original idea I had with plugins. But when when it comes down to it, when you actually start thinking about it, for the purpose of Project JEISON, you really don't need that kind of flexibility, right? Because we always have the hard-coded pipeline or like a hard-coded sequence in which things should be happening. How are y'all? Doing good, doing good. We're trying something different today. Reacting to articles, which we pretty much never do. And Vellum, another GUI tool for building and testing complex workflows. I think I've heard of Vellum before, but I don't really remember. I've probably seen it at some point, but I've never actually given it a try myself. But this just seems like a testing suite for AIs and AI stuff. Did you consider checking Pydantic AI instead of LangChain? More convenient? Well, the thing is, I'm building out my own framework. I'm not even using LangChain or Pydantic AI or any of that because I have a they just don't really fit my use case, like the very specific use case that I have. Well, you could probably build it out, but it's going to be more of a hassle, and I would like to have more fine-grained control over my own pipeline, right? These frameworks make it easy to get started by simplifying standard low-level tasks like calling LLMs. Yep, defining and parsing, defining and parsing tools and chaining calls together. However, they often create extra layers of abstraction. Yeah, this is exactly what I was talking about. That can obscure the underlying prompts and responses. Yeah, when I was trying out LangChain, I noticed that it was a little bit more difficult to have more fine-grained control and really understand what's going on under the hood, right? If I want to make tweaks as to how things are being streamed, how things are being connected, when we're broadcasting out information, then I would actually need to go within the abstractions within the LangChain library or the Pydantic AI library, and I would need to modify the package within there. And when I'm distributing Project JAISON, that would then mean I would need to have my own fork of the project and distribute it through there, which is just like a bunch of things that I do not want to maintain extra, right? Which is the main reason why, if you have the opportunity, if you have the knowledge, then just don't use these libraries. Don't try and use a library, and it's okay to reinvent the wheel on that part because the wheel has a very specific difference that you want for it. Versus something like a database, you wouldn't want to re-implement that from scratch because there's a lot of complexity towards that, and generally they do a good job of creating databases and database engines to begin with. So you don't really need to go in and make fine-grained changes within something like a database engine. But for some stuff like LLMs, there are a lot of areas where you do want to have fine-grained control. And so it would make sense to just build it up from scratch as opposed to using something like LangChain or Pydantic AI, right? You would only really use those if you're trying to pull something together really scrappily or prototype something or just like, I don't know, get something done really quickly. Weekend project, right? True, the more abstraction generalizations you have on those frameworks, the more unrelevant controls you have to refine, the less deep control you actually have. Pretty much. I suggested Pydantic because it gives you more control. Yeah, it might give you more control. I don't really have experience with Pydantic AI. It might give you more control, but it's still kind of the same case as something like LangChain, where it is introducing another layer of abstraction, right? Uh, They can also make it tempting to add complexity when a simpler setup would suffice. This is also another point, right? You're adding extra features that you don't really need. You're exploding the size of the project, and you're also adding like more adapters and kind of hoops you need to jump through just to send data between components, right? We suggest that developers start by using LLM APIs directly. Many patterns can be implemented in a few lines of code. If you do use a framework, ensure you understand the underlying code. Incorrect assumptions about what's under the hood are a common source of customer error. But this point about using LLM APIs, I guess what they mean here is like microservices. Each LLM has its own API, kind of like Llama CPP, for example. I mean, I guess that is like a pretty standardized way of doing things, but this would also introduce the quote unquote abstraction of the network layer or just some sort of requesting layer, right? Something that makes these API calls when you can just make it, or when you can just like embed it directly into your program. If you're fine with doing stuff like a monolithic project, you can just have this be a function call and that's fine. When using frameworks in productive environments, LangChain has been the only one that provides everything you need. Even if it has a lot of abstractions, they give you tools to dig in. When it comes to working across teams, frameworks do make it easier in that kind of sense, where everybody has kind of like the same language and don't have their own. There isn't as much stuff that they need to understand and kind of sync each other's understanding on, right? A framework is kind of like elevating the baseline in which everybody can start working on. But the moment you need to break away from that baseline, then you start to introduce problems, right? I feel like for the majority of cases, you can get away with using LangChain, right? You can add any tool as an MCP now, so you can control what tool modifications you need in an isolated customization sprints per tool/feature. You can add any tool as an MCP, so you can control what tool modifications you need in isolated customization. What do you mean customization sprints? I've never heard of that before. But yeah, I think the point is like not so much about the tooling aspect, but just like the fine grained control. I mean, 2 days or 3 days for tools without affecting the system. Okay. Coding sprints isolated from JEISON. Okay. Customization sprints per tool. I mean, that would only modify like the actual tool calling aspect, right? The aspects where the agent is actually interacting with something. But what I'm talking about is other features not really relevant to the AI itself, but to the AI system around it. So not necessarily tool calling, but rather communication of information back to your clients, for example, if you're running LangChain inside of your server. Yeah, something like that. Building blocks, frameworks, and agents. In this section, we'll explore the common patterns for agentic systems we've seen in production. We'll start with our foundational building block, the augmented LLM, and progressively increase complexity from simple compositional workflows to autonomous agents. So building block, the augmented LLM. So this is like the base thing, the actual LLM itself. The basic building block for agentic systems is the LLM enhanced with augmentations such as retrieval, tools, and memory. So RAG and stuff like that for LLMs. Our current models can actively use these capabilities, generating their own search queries, selecting appropriate tools, and determining what information to retain. Our current models can actively use these capabilities, generating their own search queries, selecting appropriate tools, and determining information, what information to retain. So this is basically just tool calling, right? You have an LLM generate a bunch of tool calls, which are basically just function calls. They get parsed and the actual functions are ran with those parameters. Results are returned back. Those results are given back to the LLM. And then the LLM looks at those results and then summarizes upon them, right? Determining what information to retain, I suppose. So we have query results from retrieval, call and response from tools, and read and write from memory. Pretty much, right? Kind of like the same stuff that we've been doing with JEISON for MCP. We recommend focusing on two key aspects of the implementation, tailoring these capabilities to your specific use case and ensuring they provide an easy, well-documented interface for your LLM. MCP is already the case, and it seems like they're already going to be talking about that, so let's just keep reading on that. While there are many ways to implement these augmentations, one approach is through our recently released MCP protocol, right? Which allows developers to integrate with a growing ecosystem of third-party tools with a simple client implementation. Yep, they have this link for client implementation for our client developers. This just links back, right? Yeah, this is something we've already looked through. Or maybe not. I'll take a look at this later. But we already have our own MCP client, which already works pretty well for the majority of MCP servers, so that should be fine. For the remainder of this post, we'll assume each LLM call has access to these augmented capabilities. So pretty much they already have a description of the MCP servers and each of their endpoints. And then the LLM can just make tool calls based off of those descriptions. Interesting enough, the more you add in function definition documents for the functions being called, the more proficient and aligned the model becomes. I mean, yeah, that's just like adding more context and being more precise in the descriptions of how the LLM should make use of the particular MCP and stuff, right? It's just that the thing is, it really starts to explode the amount of tokens you're using for context and whatever, right? And so you aren't able to use that with smaller models. But if you're doing MCP, right, I would assume that you would be using a much larger model because you do need the kind of logic and thinking capabilities, or not thinking capabilities, but logical reasoning capabilities that larger models are good at, right? But they're cached. Even if they're cached, right? The LLM still has a specific context window size. Even if they're cached, the cached information still needs to be added to the prompt and given to the LLM. Unless if it's cached inside the weights, but I don't think that's the case. Because that's generally not how LLMs are structured. So in my opinion, if the provider supports caching, it becomes much better. I mean, cached at the third-party provider instant. Well, yeah, in terms of money, if you're talking about in terms of money and the token counts, yes, it is going to be cheaper if they do have like caching and whatever, so they don't have to reprocess those tokens. But what I mean is context window. Context window is very different from tokenizing information, right? Like if you have a context window of 10,000 tokens or whatever, it doesn't matter if you have caches or not around it. You can only have 10,000 tokens worth of input, and so 10,000 tokens worth of context as well as output. Because you need to remember that the output also gets appended to the context in order to generate the next token. And so the maximum conversation size of the input plus the output is only 10K in that instance. Yeah, that's what I mean. When I'm talking about like these context windows, it's mainly only a concern if you're working with local models that have a much smaller context window. If you're working with like an API-based LLM, that's definitely not the problem, right? They have like fucking what? I don't remember which one, Gemini or whatever, has like a million context window or something, fucking massive. You can store your entire computer on there and it will be able to parse it down still. It's like actually crazy how big these models are getting. Burning a forest with every single query, I swear. Workflow. Prompt chaining. Prompt chaining decomposes a task into a sequence of steps where each LLM call processes the output of the previous one. Prompt chaining decomposes a task into a sequence of steps where each LLM call processes the output of the previous one. You can add programmatic checks on any intermediate steps to ensure that the process is still on track. So yeah, this is basically just like, oh, we've generated a LLM output, we add this back to the conversation history, and then we do another chat completion on that new conversation, which is pretty much just recursively calling an LLM, right? Nothing too crazy here. Kimi K2 did a beta and the team members deleted their posts, but they technically supported 2 million now. 2 million? Really? Bro, these LLMs are actually massive. Like, think of the size. How big would that model have to be if the inputs themselves are just 2 million already? Like, It's actually crazy how big some of these LLMs are getting. I wouldn't be surprised. Do we have a 1 trillion parameter model yet? I feel like at some point, or I feel like that would have already happened, us having a 1 trillion parameter model, even if it's not the greatest model out there. Just somebody would have had to try it at some point. Kimi K2 is 1 trillion at least, but only with 32 billion active. That's fucking crazy, man. The size of that, require an entire data center just to run one model. Pass, fail, gate. This is just a hard-coded rule or check on that. Yeah, nothing too crazy here. When you use this workflow is ideal for situations where the task can be easily and cleanly decomposed into fixed subtasks. The main goal is to trade off latency with higher accuracy by making each LLM call an easier task. So it's kind of like the same concept of you don't want your LLMs to be monolithic, right? You don't LLMs or yeah, LLMs or general transformer architectures, they are capable of like performing way more than just like text to text, right? There are multimodal models where they can take in um, images as input, audio as input, text as input. They can take in all three of these at the same time and then generate something else at the end, right? Whether it be video, audio, and text, they can do any combination of the three, right? As long as you train it properly. But the thing is, you don't necessarily want a model that does everything. You want to be able to break it down into smaller models that where each model is specialized in a specific thing, right? Kind of like a bunch of experts that are good at their own thing. Not really the same thing as mixture of experts, but kind of like the same idea. And so instead of having kind of like how we have it inside of Project JAISN, right? Instead of having a singular model that takes in audio and text and outputs audio and text, instead we have a whole pipeline where we have one model specifically for speech to text, another one for text to text, and then text to speech, right? Breaking it into these three makes it much easier to train as well as improves their performance a ton. It's just that you may be giving up some extra things, such as if you were to have a model that takes in speech and then outputs a text response, you may be losing that kind of tonality. You're effectively downsampling losing the information of like tone and how it's being spoken, kind of like the expression, when you're converting that audio into text to be inputted into a text-to-text LLM, right? You're effectively downsampling that data. But you can get around that just by, I don't know, encoding that tonality or that the motion of that expression elsewhere and then providing it to the text-to-text LLM separately. Workflows are great when your AI goes through complex and same tasks, for example, when reviewing code. Goes through complex and same tasks, like reviewing code. Each step can be an aspect of the review. Yeah, basically just like each LLM can be a different test suite, right? Or trained to do a different set of tests, right? Basically, in that case, we're treating each LLM as a different test or a different test suite. And it only passes on to the next test suite or the next test if the previous one's passed. So yeah, this is basically just treating LLM calls as a normal function or as any normal function, right? Because at the end of the day, that's all LLM's tool calls are. It's just that the end result that you get is non-deterministic. So when to use this workflow is ideal for situations where the task can be easily and cleanly decomposed into fixed subtasks, right? The main goal is to trade off latency for higher accuracy by making each LLM call an easier task. Examples when prompt chaining is useful. Generating marketing copy, then translating it to a different language, right? And writing an outline for a document, checking that the outline meets a certain criteria, then writing the document based on the outline. You could kind of get away with this by training your model to have these different stages, but something like thinking models, right? These are two-stage models where you have the input, but before you actually get the output, there's a thinking block where it does a lot of the thinking. This is kind of like effectively the same thing, right? At least for this second point. You can have it think of the outline of the document and then have it within its thinking perform this check at the very end. And then in the actual response, only then start writing out the document based on the outline, right? It would kind of be the same context that you're providing it and the same context you're providing to the same LLM tool call, but you're just doing less LLM tool calls. The only reason why you would decompose it outside of that is if you want to fine-tune a model to specifically be curated for outlining a document, or if your checks for these certain criteria are like hard-coded rules or something like that. But besides that, this can all be done in a single LLM tool call. But yeah, as Lux says, as your system grows, you will need to start decomposing. Otherwise, you will start to feel the difficulties of trying to fine-tune and upkeep your model as you try to implement more features, right? And it's just not cost-effective to have to retrain your model and every single time you want to add like a new feature or something new to the workflow or a new rule or something like that. Workflow, routing. Routing classifies an input and directs it to a specialized follow-up task. This workflow allows the separation of concerns and building more specialized prompts. Without this workflow, optimizing for one kind of input can hurt performance on other inputs, right? Again, this is the kind of like the same idea of having one model do too many things, right? If it handles too many different kinds of inputs and is trained for different kinds of scenarios, kind of like if we have a personality LLM that is also trained to do MCP tool calling, then it can really hurt the performance in that area. Versus, I don't know, an LLM router, you can have one that's specialized for logical reasoning, you can have one that's specialized for humor, and so depending on the input, you can have it categorize it and classify it into a specific category for what kind of response it should be generating. So if we ask it a question, it may direct it to the more logical LLM, versus if we're just bantering, it can direct it into like the humor, the entertaining LLM, something like that. But then again, this is basically just like mixture of experts, but not as abstracted, right? Mixture of experts would be having all of these models combined into one model, but then with the weights themselves are doing the routing before it gets to these actual blocks. At least that's how I'm pretty sure mixture of experts work, but I don't really remember. AI is such an architectural problem, and it really is. All because we're working with these like quote-unquote functions where we don't even know what's going on the inside. LLMs are basically the ultimate black box abstraction when it comes to programming. They do so much black magic, but it's like, what the fuck do they even do on the inside? They're just weights and numbers. They can be slow too. That too. There's always the timing non-guarantees, the non-determinism of the timings and everything. How could we implement this? Well, for the LLM router, you could just have another AI model. Doesn't necessarily have to be an LLM. It can be something like for Project JEISN, right? We have a separate model for classifying emotions. So whatever response that JEISN gives, that gets sent to that model, and that model can kind of say, oh, this is angry, this is sad. We can use those labels, and we can, depending on those labels, we can just have an if block, which does a different LLM call, or calls a different LLM, either by calling a different LLM server that's running a different model, or just loading up a new model and then running that, right? It's pretty much just two AI models, one LLM, one for classification, and in between is a massive if block. I wonder if this also covers the case of hierarchical agents. Forget if they cover that later as a separate topic. I guess we'll see. When to use this workflow. Routing works well for complex tasks, where there are distinct categories that are better handled separately, and where classification can be handled accurately, either by an LLM or a more traditional classification model algorithm. Yep, this is basically what I was talking about, right? The Roberta model we use for classifying emotion is basically this traditional classification model. Although, I'm pretty sure it's using BERT, which is still kind of like an LLM, but that's besides the point, right? All LLMs are basically just neural networks, so they're all the same. Examples for when routing is useful, directing different types of customer service queries. So in our case, the different customer service queries would be the conversation, right? Whether we are asking it a question or just bantering with it. So general questions, refund requests, technical support, basically, right? Into different downstream processes, prompts, and tools. Routing easy/common questions to smaller models like Claude 3.5, Haiku, or hard and unusual questions to more capable models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet to optimize cost and speed. You know when OpenAI kind of announced their, I forget what it was, but I feel like I remember them talking about some point that they introduced this kind of feature where they're able to commit more resources or more thinking time to harder problems. I wonder if this is what they're doing, where they have multiple models on the back end of varying sizes. So I guess more simple conversational tasks are sent to a smaller model so that they end up completing faster with less resources. And then when they're asked like deep research questions, for example, that gets sent to a much larger model that does a lot of the thinking. I wonder if that's what they're doing, but this is like a pretty interesting use case that I didn't really think of. Instead of routing it based off of input type, in terms of what kind of response we're expecting, we can route it based off of input type in terms of difficulty of the task. Lots of coding agents do this, really. And the open router thing I showed can do this as well, really. Okay. Because I did take a look at the open router thing, but I thought that was just like an adapter, kind of like my operations manager or the operations manager that I have inside of Project JAS. And I thought it was just a switcher between different implementations of AI models and services, depending on what you configured. I didn't know it was like in a real-time router or an actual router. Is this a timer stream? No, this is just like, this is a this is a chill stream disguised as a dev stream. Honestly, I don't know how often I'll be doing timer streams anymore, timer dev streams, ones where I'm actually working on Project JEISON and coding. It might be a much rarer occurrence just because of how hard it is to actually get work done during those streams and how boring it can be for you guys as well. The open router thing is cool, allows people to use any big model they want basically. Yeah, I'll give it a closer look, and it might be something that gets used in version 3.0, who knows, but if it can't support something like if it makes configuring stuff like Llama CPP harder, then I'm probably not gonna use it, right? Because I don't really think we need that sort of functionality. It is cool to have. And we might add it, just depending on the complexity of that library in order to configure things such as Llama CPP and how well it plays into other models like Whisper CPP. I don't know if it is able to do Whisper CPP or if it's only for text-to-text models. We'll see. Can we have link on Discord of the topic? Sure. You want this? You know, sure. I'll put it in general. Or, and I wish we had like a stream related chat or something like that inside of the server. But yeah, I'll just put it in general for now. Hello, you're back. Hello. You didn't miss much. Just more technical yapping. Should we, Haku, can you make a channel, or can you ask LOL to make a channel for stream related chat? So I can post stuff related to the stream in there, or people can chat about stream stuff in there. All right, thanks. All right, workflow, parallelization. LLMs that sometimes work simultaneously on a task and have their outputs aggregated programmatically. This workflow parallelization manifests in two key variations, sectioning and voting. This is something that I did want to do, but I was scared about the computational demand on a system for something like running models locally on a single GPU, right? I don't think you can really achieve this simply because you're already maxing out one GPU, at least with Project JAI Sin. But this could be really useful for something like MCP if you have multiple tool calls that don't really depend on each other. Then you can run these in parallel, right? Something like a database query search as well as an internet query search, both of those at the same time to try and find some sort of information. You can do both of those at the same time, and then have an LLM at the very end which summarizes or appends both of those contexts to the conversation and then sends that off, right? As opposed to having the database query happen, wait for that to finish, and then start the internet search. That ends up doubling the amount of time you would need to require, but it halves the amount of resources that you would need for your system. So you're kind of like trading off resources for latency. So for something like sectioning, this is breaking a task into independent subtasks, running in parallel, something like independent MCP tool calls, right? Or voting, running the same task multiple times to get a diverse set of outputs. So maybe you're trying to come up with a joke, and so you generate 10 different jokes, and then you have an LLM at the very end which takes the best joke, for example, and that becomes the output. Again, just depends on how much resources you have available and can sacrifice to do something like this. When to use this workflow? Parallelization, I actually can't speak. Parallelization is effective when the divided sum task can be parallelized for speed, or when multiple perspectives or attempts are needed for higher confidence results. For complex tasks with multiple considerations, LLMs generally perform better when each consideration is handled by a separate LLM call, allowing focused attention on each specific aspect. So yeah, basically like the same thing I said before, right? Each MCP server has their own specialized tasks. They aren't overloading on the number of tasks that they do complete, just so that they are specialized, but at the same time, they are completing at the same time. Examples where parallelization is useful, they already talked about this, but sectioning, implementing guardrails, where one model instance process user queries, while the other screens them for inappropriate content and requests. Huh? I feel like this would be something that would be done in sequence, not in parallel. Or one model instance processes user queries, while the other screens them for inappropriate content or requests. This is just like filtering, right? You're generating the response, but at the same time, you're even checking if you should respond to that request, right? Something like what OpenAI does, where they might generate a response saying, oh, I can't do this for you. But they also might have another one generating a response like, oh, here's how this is done. And then on the third branch, they have an LLM that's deciding which one should be chosen based off of whether if it's an illegal topic or not. Automating evaluations for evaluating LLM performance, where each LLM call evaluates a different aspect of a model's performance on a given prompt. I don't really understand this one. What do you mean? Automating evaluations for evaluating LLM performance, where each LLM call evaluates a different aspect of the LLM's. Oh, so these are like a panel of judges. So each model is a judge, and then you have a panel of judges judging whatever was given inside of the input. And so that ends up becoming like each one gives a score for a different criteria. I guess, sure. Voting. Reviewing a piece of code or vulnerabilities. AI code reviews, anybody? Fucking AI security? Where several different prompts reviews and flag code if they find a problem. Evaluating whether a given piece of content is inappropriate, with multiple prompts evaluating different aspects or requiring different vote thresholds to balance false positives and negatives, right? I guess for any of these design patterns, they can be applied to more than just LLMs. They can be applied to any sort of neural network or any sort of classification task, for example, right? You can use the voting strategy as like you have 5 different classification models, each with their own different biases or whatever, and then you would have an aggregator. I'm pretty sure this is like, I forget what it's called. Is this random forest? Some sort of, it's like each of these are a decision tree, and then you have a random forest, right? Multiple trees make up a forest. At the very end, you take the majority rules. Basically the same thing. Workflow, orchestrator workers. In the orchestrator workers workflow, the central LLM dynamically breaks down tasks, delegates them to worker LLMs, and synthesizes their results. Wait. So this is basically just an LLM. This is basically an LLM doing tool calls to call other LLMs. At least that's what I think this is. Orchestrator. Because your orchestrator would be an LLM, and then your lackeys are also LLMs, and then at the very end, you just aggregate the results. So it's like a combination of aggregator. It's a combination of parallelization and routing. Yeah, it's a combination of the two. Are they saying synthesize is like summarization here? Um, yeah. I mean, okay, it would depend. It would be a summarization. Each of your LLM calls here, they don't necessarily have to be LLMs, right? They can once again be other classification models. So you can have an orchestrator that takes in an input, something like JAI central response, right? And this would generate the emotion. This would generate the action, and this would generate, I don't know, whatever else there is, right? And the synthesizer would be another LLM, which looks at the results of all 3 of these and then turns this into another context, or turns this or processes each of these inputs and does something with it. This synthesizer effectively is just output processing and aggregation through summarization, or maybe just turning it into a structured dictionary and then sending that out. Just some way of aggregating information. When you use this workflow is well suited for complex tasks where you can't predict the subtasks needed. So once again, like routing, right? This is the same case as routing. So in coding, for example, the number of files that need to be changed and the nature of the change in each file likely depend on the task. Again, this is done through routing. Whereas it's topographically similar. What? Whereas it's topographically similar. The key difference from parallelization is its flexibility. Subtasks aren't predefined, but determined by the orchestrator based on the specific input. And so, yeah. So parallelization, right? This assumes that every single one of these LLMs are being called and then the results are being sent to the aggregator. But in this case, because we have this orchestrator in front, because we have some sort of routing, multi-routing occurring in front, that only selects a subset like LLM call 1 and LLM call 3, but LLM call 2 is not being called. Only a few of these make it to the synthesizer. So LLM 2 does not give anything to the synthesizer, but the synthesizer should still be able to take the results of LLM call 1 and LLM call 3 and still produce some sort of summary out of it. Well, if it's structured, you don't need synthesization. Well, if it's structured, you would still need this quote-unquote synthesizer not to transform the result into plain text, but just to combine the results from multiple tool calls. So you would have maybe a dictionary that says, oh, result 1 and result 3, and then that would be your output, right? I'm thinking of your synthesizer not as an LLM, but as just a generic function that takes multiple inputs and generates a singular output that combines all of those inputs in some way. On the inside of that function, it could be an LLM, which is taking that information and summarizing it, and then that's your singular output. The response is your singular output, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be that way. But synthesizer in this context, they may be referring to it as an AI that's doing summarization, but I'm just thinking more broadly. So, yeah. Where the example work orchestrator workers are useful. Coding products that make complex changes to multiple files each time, and search tasks that involve gathering and analyzing information from multiple sources for possible relevant information. So something we could use this in something like the memory module, right? Or not really the memory module, but some sort of information gathering module for JEISON, right? We can have it so LLM call 1 queries the database, the memories database, and LLM call 2 queries the internet, LLM call 3 queries a different database or something like that, right? And so we can have the orchestrator determine which kind of information stores, which databases or the internet it should query to search for a certain result. And then the results of that can be sent to a synthesizer, and the synthesizer can then decide which ones are actually answering the question and then use that as the output. Okay. Yeah, that might be something that I want to implement for the memory module. I'm still not too certain how I want to do the memory module, because right now we're just doing it through MCP calls, right? But I want there to be specific emphasis on the memory module because it's so much more important than something like tool calling or something, right? It really does influence how prompts are or how responses are created. And I would like for it to be done for every single response that is generated by JEISON, right? I would like J.E. Ison to have this kind of thinking stage before she actually attempts to make a response. Hold on, let me get a drink. Oh my god, we're only halfway through this freaking article. It's been an hour. This is a long ass article. What about implementing the 5 different types of memory? Short term, working, episodic, procedural. Um, we can go that route of implementing all the different kinds of memory that like humans have, right? But how effective they are, how much they're needed, I'm not really sure. I feel like the most we really need is working short term and long term, right? Working being the actual conversational script, short term being for that session, and then long term being persistent memory. Um, anything more than that, I don't think we really need, simply because those are just like workspaces for humans, right? Um, and they can kind of be reduced to just being short-term memory or working memory in a way. Okay, workflow. Evaluator optimizer. In the evaluator optimizer workflow, one LLM generates a response while another provides evaluation and feedback in a loop. So yeah, 2 LLMs talking to each other. One is trying to get a response out. This guy, probably a filter or some sort of evaluator, is seeing whether if it's good enough or not. If it's not good enough, we ask it to try again. If it is good enough, then we give that response. We can kind of like abstract this out as well. No, we can kind of generalize this further and have this just be a response loop, right? Where we can have something like an MCP, an LLM doing MCP calls, those being generated, those being processed, being sent to another LLM, which then determines if the question has been answered or if it should continue trying to search for the answer given the results from the previous query. And then if the question is answered, then it would just give the response. Otherwise, it would send another request to the MCP LLM to continue trying to dig deeper, but with the results from the previous request. And so this would be a way of like kind of diving deeper. And then to guarantee that this does finish, you would have like a maximum depth. So like this iteration can only occur 10 times before we give up and just give the response with what we have. That was kind of like the idea I had with MCP, with the MCP tool calling from when we were exploring knowledge graphs and whatever. I did talk about trying to implement this at some point, but I never got around to it. So, hey. Memory is important, but also different from the entertainer's perspective. So memory may look different for a VTuber than a normal chatbot. I'm not really sure because a VTuber is just a glorified chatbot, right? The reason why I'm saying we would separate it into these 3 different categories from working, short term, and long term is because they fulfill 3 different roles, right? Short term is, or no, the working memory is the things that are always going to be there, and always going to be influencing the response because these are the things that we are responding to, right? Short term memory is things that is like a supplement for the context window. So re-adding things from way, way earlier inside of the conversation that might have gone out of context, that might have been shifted out of the context window, and then re-adding that back to the information so it's back inside of working memory. And then persistent memory is kind of like the same thing, but it's less frequently accessed. It's kind of like the hard drive of the computer, right? It's less frequently accessed, but it contains a lot more information and information across sessions. So the LLM will have context as to whether a memory being retrieved is something that was recently said versus something that was said within the same session versus something that was said in a previous session. Some things you have to decide to say or not say because the stream topics or goal of the day, right? Some things you have to decide to say or not say because the stream topics or goal of the day, right? In RP chats, bots, that does not matter. Well, I feel like that would just be guided by the scenario prompt anyways, right? I don't think they would be accessing irrelevant memories if it has nothing to do with the conversation, because that would already be filtered out by the LLM that's evaluating. Or it would be filtered out by the distance of the memories relative to ones that are actually more relevant. This paper talks about memories. Let's see. Cognitive architectures in language agents. We can give this a look in a future stream. I think for this stream, we're just going to be going through this article. Cognitive architectures for language agents, though. Wait, let me just see what this does. So this is just the generic LLM, input output. Structure B is adding more, okay, this is zooming out a little bit. So this is like your normal LLM, input output. The output influences actions. This is basically just a normal agent, right? A normal agent that uses a language model as its backend. And then this is the entire ecosystem with memory included. So you have your LLM here. This learning adds stuff to memory, retrieves stuff. This is RAG. And then quote unquote reasoning is just recursively calling the LLM until you actually get the answer. And then this does, yeah, okay. This is basically what we were talking about. But then this probably goes deeper into actual specific architectures, but we'll get to that. We'll explore that in a future day. Not always. Context of what an AI is doing is important. Memory implementation will be different for a podcaster, RP model, AI VTuber, support agent. Using embedding doesn't just solve everything, lol. Different banks of memory. So what, you're suggesting like putting labels on top of memories or something like that? Because I don't really know what the benefit of having more memory stores would be besides being like, okay, you have multiple memory stores, and so I'm going to select this specific one for this stream, right? I'm just saying that an AI VTuber memory will be more curated than a simple chatbot. I mean, I guess it really depends on, I guess it is dependent on implementation, right? I'm saying working short term, long term, because that's the architecture that I would want. But maybe you would have a more specific, maybe you would want to do things differently. And so you would have different stores for memory for, I'm not really sure what else, to be honest. Short term and long term is fine for now. Yeah, and like I don't really know in what other use case we would require a different memory store as well. You could have graph RAG categorize things by emotional connections as well as normal categorizing things. Yeah, we did explore the graph RAG stuff. And the connections that are formed between those are just like, maybe collapse, and as you grow it, memory will be more complicated. I mean, it's just something that we'll have to see in the future. I can't really make a good, like, I can't really give a good perspective of what that would look like now until I actually face those challenges. But I think like something like graph RAG plus a vector database is already good enough for like the majority of cases for the time being. When to use this workflow. This workflow is particularly effective when you have a clear evaluation criteria and when iterative refinement provides measurable value. The two signs of good fit are, first, that LLM responses can be demonstratively approved when a human articulates their feedback. And second, that the LLM can provide such feedback. This is analogous to the iterative writing process a human writer might go through when producing a polished document. Okay. And examples where this is useful: literary translation, where there are nuances that the translator LLM might not capture initially, but where an evaluator LLM can provide useful critiques. In a way, this is just similar to adversarial training for something like GANs. Do GANs use that? I think so. Something like that, where we deliberately try and create like worst case scenarios and tell the LLM to do better, right? That would be in the context of training, but this is in the context of inference. Complex search tasks that require multiple rounds of searching. Yeah, so this is basically what I was talking about with the iterative MCP tool calling, trying to dig deeper until we find an actual solution. So multiple rounds of searching and analysis to gather comprehensive information where the evaluator decides whether further searches are warranted. So that's basically what I was talking about earlier. Ugh, my throat is so dry. All right, agents. Agents are emerging in production as LLMs mature in key capabilities, understanding complex inputs, engaging in reasoning and planning, and using tools reliably and recovering from errors. Agents begin their work with either a command from or interactive discussion with a human user. Once the task is clear, agents plan and operate independently, potentially returning to the human for further information or judgment. During execution, it's crucial for the agent to gain ground truth from the environment at each step, such as tool call results or code execution to assess its progress. So that's the need for iterative feedback, and also if it gets stuck up trying to do a tool call or trying to execute a task, it is the most annoying fucking thing ever, right? Because you can't necessarily do the tool calling for it. It needs to like guess effectively the actual tool call. And it's so finicky to get this right. But I don't know. Agents can then pause the human feedback at checkpoints or when encountering blockers. The task often terminates upon completion, but it is also common to include stopping conditions, such as maximum number of iterations to maintain control. Hey, would you look at that? That's exactly what I said. Agents can handle sophisticated tasks, but their implementations are often straightforward. They are typically just LLMs using tools based on environment feedback in a loop. It is therefore crucial to design tool sets and their documentation carefully and thoroughly. We expand on best practices for tool development in Appendix 2. Best practices for tool development in Appendix 2. Okay. Prompt engineering your tools. Oh god. I feel like prompting for tools is really, really annoying because you have to describe a lot in terms of not just what the tool is about, but when would be a good time to use that tool. Because we have something like memory storage and memory retrieval from a vector database that's out of Project JEISON for one of our MCP modules, right? But the thing is, J.E.Ison just keeps spamming to save memories. And so instead of saving only the salient memories, she considers everything to be salient. And she just keeps storing more and more things into there until everything is just like the same um, the same information just repeated in different ways. Limit having flashbacks to the Graph RG stream? Oh god, man. Like old greedy little AI, like they're eating up all my storage and all my VRAM. They're just finicky, man. So what is this? This is the agentic quote unquote diagram at a high level, right? LLM gets feedback from a human. They perform actions with their environment to get feedback from their environment, and then they have a stopping condition. Okay. So when to use agents? Agents can be used for open-ended problems where it's difficult or impossible to predict the required number of steps and where you can't hardcode the fixed path. So kind of like the same thing as having an AI evaluate an AI because of how undeterministic AIs are. The only way to debug and evaluate an LLM is with another LLM. The LLM will potentially operate for many turns, and you must have some level of trust in its decision making. Agents' autonomy, well, agents' autonomy make them ideal for scaling tasks in trusted environments. Trusted environments. Fucking throw them in an untrusted environment and they escape the ecosystem, escape to the internet. The autonomous nature of agents means higher costs and the potential of compounding errors. We recommend extensive testing in sandbox environments along with appropriate guardrails. So examples where agents are useful, the following examples are from our own implementations. A coding agent to resolve SWE bench tasks, which involve edits to many files on a task description. Or our computer use reference implementation, where Claude uses a computer to accomplish tasks. And so this is what it looks like. I should, at some point, I'm gonna add an MCP to J.E.Ison so that she can interact with my VS Code. I feel like it's going to be a horrible mistake because she's probably going to end up making code changes without me knowing. And then that's going to break the entire system and it's going to be a debugging nightmare, but it would be funny, I guess. Human in the loop is good for using it in places. Wait, what? Human in the loop is good for using it in places it can mess up. Yes. You pretty much always need a human to realign the conversation or the direction that the AI is going, right? Like I said last stream, you can't really have Neurosama just like playing off of herself because that ends up becoming AI slop and it turns into like complete garbage, right? You need some sort of human alignment, like a collaborator or a Twitch chat, in order to guide the conversation and keep the AI consistent with the conversation. That's like my nieces. We can't understand one of them most of the time, but the other niece translates and corrects the other. Well, human in the loop is approving or denying tool calls before they happen. Yes. Well, human in the loop is more generalized than that, but that is a form of human in the loop feedback, right? Just checking, making sure things are going, aborting if things are going wrong, right? So we have here human queries the interface, and then until the task completes, we're always talking with the LLM and getting feedback from the LLM. The interface sends context to the LLM, which is basically the prompt. This searches the files using some tool calling and gets back some information, and it keeps doing this iteratively, right? Until tests pass, it keeps running code, getting status, testing, getting results. And then once it finally completes that task, it gets back the results, and that result gets displayed back to the user. Okay, that's just human in the loop, right? I guess human in the loop would additionally include more human interaction in between each of these steps so that they would always be getting back the results. But I guess it is kind of dependent on implementation, how often you want to see the results, when exactly you want to see results. But this is generally what it looks like at a simple level. So combining and customizing these patterns. These building blocks aren't perspective or prescriptive. Prescriptive. These building blocks aren't prescriptive. There are common patterns that developers can shape and combine to fit different use cases. The key to success, as with many LLM features, is measuring performance and iterating on implementations. To repeat, you should consider adding complexity only when it demonstratively improves outcomes. Fucking plugins. Success. Success in the LLM space isn't about building the most sophisticated system. It's about building the right system for your needs. Start with simple prompts, optimize them with comprehensive evaluation, and add multi-step agentic systems only when simpler solutions fall short. When implementing agents, we've tried to follow three core principles. Maintain simplicity in the agent's design, so not plugins. Prioritize transparency by explicitly showing the agent's planning steps, so not plugins. And carefully craft your agent-computer interface through thorough tool documentation and testing. Again, also not plugins. Plugins has to be the worst mistake that I've ever implemented. Like, oh my god, 4 months to absolutely nothing. Or be OpenAI and not provide the reasoning text. That is true. Wait. Yeah, they don't provide the reasoning text, I don't think. LM Studio is nice because you can actually see the kind of thinking that they're performing for any sort of model. Like if I were to use the Quen model, it would show the thinking inside of like a different block. And then you can see exactly what it's thinking of and how long it's taking. And then how long it takes for the response block as well. We adding plugins back in? Hell yeah, no we're not. Frameworks can help you get started quickly, but don't hesitate to reduce abstraction levels and build with basic components as you move to production. By following these principles, you can create agents that are not only powerful but also reliable, maintainable, and trusted by users. I will unmod myself if he adds back plugins, lol. It's not that serious. You don't like LM Studio? Why don't you like LM Studio? What's wrong with LM Studio? It's very limited. I feel like it's very good for toying around with LLMs. I wouldn't use it as I wouldn't use it as a pure backend for a lot of your LLM projects, but I think it's very good as just a normal chat interface for local models. Maybe you would want different samplers, maybe you would want more sophisticated stopping conditions, but I think for the purpose of just general conversation and testing out an LLM on specific system prompts and inputs, user inputs, I think it is pretty good for that point. It is a good starting point. It is a good starting point. I prefer TGUI. What's TGUI? TGUI. Texas Graphical User Interface. I don't think this is what you're talking about. Text generation web UI. Oh. Text generation web UI. Text generation web UI. Ooga booga. Nice. LLM UI for advanced features, easy setup, multiple backend support. This also looks nice. And this is probably cross-platform compatible, right? Because it is in a web UI. Okay. Mode, instruct, and chat. And you have all of these. You have default, notebook, parameters, the model, the session information. You have chat histories, which is kind of nice. Okay. I don't know. Different tools, I guess. For me, I'm like pretty satisfied with LM Studio. There isn't really anything else that I need for my testing purposes. Oh, wait, that's the end. Oh, we got the appendixes though. Should we read these? Appendix 1, Agents in Practice. Our work with customers has revealed two particularly promising applications for AI agents that demonstrate the practical value of the patterns discussed above. Both applications illustrate how agents add the most value for tasks. Okay, whatever. Customer support. Coding agents. I don't really care about those. Let's look at Appendix 2, Prompt Engineering Your Tools. You have another article? I've been talking for an hour 30 straight. You know what? Save it for next stream. Save it for next stream. It's short. It's really short. How short? Fine. Post it in chat. I'll take a look. Because I wanted to look through this and see if I have looked through this before. Although, let me just give this a quick skim. Common errors, response timing, best practices, how it works, running the client. What does a normal client look like? Tool handling, process query, modify process query to handle specific tool types, response processing, add a GUI, key components explained. Entry point, connected server, chat loop, client cleanup, MCP client started, type your inputs, query, process query. Okay, no, I don't need to look at this. All right, what is this? Another Anthropic, Claude character. I prefer this one because you can test a lot of parameters and it's very easy. Parameter testing. Oh yeah, that is true. Wait, can we not? Wait, hold on. Let me pull up LM Studio really quick. I thought we could change a lot of the parameters inside of LM Studio. But I might be wrong. I might be misremembering. So here we have LM Studio. So inside of load, this is just for loading. Prompting, that's just for that. Inference, we're gonna just sum. But this is, I guess you're right. This is only, the ChatGPT or the OpenAI compatible parameters, right? And I too also hate the ones that they provide because there isn't a lot, right? Something, I know Cobalt CPP, or at least I'm pretty sure Cobalt CPP has compatibility with other samplers, such as dry, for example, right? Don't repeat yourself. And those tend to also be better. But yeah, I can see what you mean. Maybe let's see if the other one provides more parameters or something. Here we go. We have temperature, we have min-p, but we also have top and sigma. Sigma male. Top K, XTC threshold, XTC probability, try multiplier. Yeah, so it includes a lot more different samplers that isn't available on LM Studio. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the reason. I should probably try this as well because I did want to try out these other samplers as well. What else do we have here? Miro, stat, I don't know what these are. What is this? Other options. Sampler priority. Okay. Max new tokens. Okay. Filter by loader. This is the runtime engine. Okay. Okay. It's a lot more configurable, I will admit. I do also want to play around with Cobalt CPP a little bit more and see what else that provides. because I haven't really explored it all too much outside of loading up a Whisper model. But yeah, where's Noelle and her Cobalt CPP advertising? Yeah. Let me read this appendix 2 for a second because I'm kind of interested to see what this says. Prompt engineering your tools. No matter which agentic system you're building, tools will likely be an important part of your agent. Tools enable Claude to interact with external services and APIs by specifying their exact structure and definition in our API. When Claude responds, it will include a tool use block in the API response if it plans to invoke a tool. Tool definitions and specifications should be given as much prompt engineering attention as your overall prompts. So yeah, right. The actual details of this prompt for your tool, it's basically like you're prompting the entire thing to use that one tool specifically. In this brief appendix, we describe how to prompt engineer your tools. There are often several ways to specify the same action. For instance, you can specify a file edit by writing a diff or by rewriting the entire file. For structured output, you can return code inside Markdown or inside of JSON. In software engineering, differences like these are cosmetic and can be converted losslessly from one to another. However, some formats are much more difficult for the LLM to write than others. Writing a diff requires knowing how many lines are changing in the chunk header before the new code is written. Yeah, because LLMs are generative and they generate from left to right, they don't have any context as to what will be generated in the future. So something like writing out a chunk, a diff is difficult because the information at the very beginning depends, the information in the diff, the header of it, requires information from the hunks that haven't yet been generated yet. And the only way it would know that information is by generating it out. And then only then it would understand how many hunks it has generated, right? It's like trying to predict the future before you've actually tried it, right? It's like me trying to say how many lines of code I will need to change in order to implement an MCP server before I've even implemented an MCP server, right? It's kind of impossible until I actually do it myself. So writing code inside of JSON compared to Markdown requires extra escaping of new lines and quotes. I guess so, unless if you do everything in line, which is what we're doing with our MCP. Our MCP tool call is using JSON as the input and telling the LLM to generate JSON. But the thing is, we aren't worried about this escape sequences and whatever because we are doing everything in line. Oh, and thank you, Richard. I'm just going to call it Richard. Thank you, Richard, for the 1 month sub. Boom, I'm back to subbing. You're back to subbing. Our suggestions for deciding on tool formats are the following. Give the model extra tokens to quote unquote think before it writes itself into a corner. So basically for the example of the diff, it would write out the code first, and then in the actual response, it has the context for how many lines it has written. So then it can create the header with the number of lines changed, and then all of the hunks after that. 2 months? Twitch only says 1 month. These liars at Twitch. Keep the format close to what the model has seen naturally occurring in text on the internet. And make sure there's no...
Thank you so much
it's
for
my
the
second sub.
Oh my god, guys. Yes.
Thank you for the 2
In my
months.
second sub.
Wait, did you like buy 2 months? Or did that just come in late? Subscribe with 2 months. Subscribe with 2 months. Oh, you subscribed for 2 months, 1 month in a row. Well, thank you. Make sure there's no formatting overhead, such as having to keep an accurate count of thousands of lines of code, or string escaping any code it writes. So I guess doing inline JSON, 1 line of JSON, I think that's fine. One rule of thumb is to think about how much effort goes into human-computer interfaces and plan to invest just as much effort in creating a good computer interface, so agent-computer interface. Here are some thoughts on how to do so. Well, I already struggle in trying to do a human-computer interfaces, so this is already fucked. Thank God we have MCP. Put yourself in the model shoes. It's obvious how to use this tool based on the description and parameters, or would you need to think carefully about it? If so, then it's probably also true for the model. A good tool definition often includes example usage, edge cases, input format requirements, and clear boundaries from other tools. A good tool definition often includes example usage, edge cases, input format requirements, and clear boundaries from other tools. We don't do a lot of this for our MCP server, I realize. We don't specify any edge cases. We do have input format requirements, but it can sometimes be wrong. And clear boundaries from other tools. We don't have this either, right? We aren't necessarily stating all the side effects or all the effects of the tool, right? We aren't properly documenting. We're just giving like a very brief summary of what it does, but really we should be more descriptive. Okay. How can you change parameter names or descriptions to make things more obvious, right? Human readable code. Think of it as writing a great docstring for a junior developer on your team. This is especially important when you have many similar tools. Okay, what is Pokeyoke? Pokeyoke your tools. Change the arguments so that it's harder to make mistakes. Pokeyoke is a mechanism in a process that helps an equipment operator to avoid mistakes and defects by preventing, correcting, and drawing attention to human errors as they occur. So mistake proofing, idiot proofing, basically. Forcing a function or behavior shaping constraint. So shaping the tools, the models, either physically or in software, so that there is one obvious way to do it, and so they don't go down the non-obvious path that might break things. I assume that's what they mean. So while building out your agent for Sweet Bench, we actually spent while building our agent for Sweet Bench, we actually spent more time optimizing our tools than the overall prompt. For example, we found that the model would make mistakes with tools using relative file paths after the agent has moved out of the root directory. To fix this, we changed the tool to always require absolute file paths, and we found that the model used this method flawlessly. Again, idiot proofing, right? That's also something we don't really do. Okay. I guess, yeah, there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of good information here for what we can do for at least version 3 of Project JAISYN, or Project Vita, as it's going to be called. I'll keep these in mind, especially for the MCP one, because the MCP servers, we do have a lot of problems with those, especially since I'm just building them on the fly, not really putting much attention into them. But we saw from the graph RG stream how that can go wrong, how a bad description ended up killing our entire database. And so we had to change up the prompt so it stops doing that. But we need to be able to catch those errors before we even perform the queries so that we don't end up killing the database with something like a key that has a space in it, for example. I'm happy to see that what I'm doing that I'm doing a lot of what this blog is talking about. Yeah. A lot of these design patterns are pretty obvious, but there's just things that you don't really have like conscious at the top of your mind, right? Maybe you might have it conscious when you're actually planning things out, but when you're winging things, you don't really think about these, but they kind of come naturally at times, right? This is just normal, especially when you think of LLM tool calls or LLM calls as just another generic function, doing things in parallel, having routing, I don't know, stuff like this. It's interesting to think about. And when you do start thinking about it and using these intentionally, it can start to become much more powerful, right? Oh my god, my back, man. I am actually an old man. I I decided to like sweep my floor 2 days ago, but I only have like a handheld brush and a dustpan, so I had to like get on my knees to like dust the floor. But oh my god, it's been 2 days and I still have lower back pain from that day. This is the second time this has happened. The second time I've swept my floor since coming back to university, and the second time I've ended up with back pain because of it. This man is already dead inside. I am dead inside. I'm like the biggest sloucher. Probably because my chairs and the chairs at school are absolutely terrible, so I never sit in them properly. But oh my god, I don't remember Go Sports, bro. I don't think that would even change anything. I mean, I do sports. It's just that the amount I slouch, especially inside of my chair when I'm doing programming, is fucking absurd and is oh my god. I'm actually a shrimp. It's oh my back. Oh, I need like I don't know if they have these in other cultures, but inside of like Chinese medicine, we always have like these herbal patches. You just slap onto a really sore area, and then by the next day, it's like stops being sore. I don't know how they work. Some sort of herbal voodoo magic. I need one of those right now. I ran out of those. All right, this one. You said this one was short, right? This one looks long as shit by my standards. Okay, fine. Claude's character. What should be an AI's personality be?
Anthropic. Now, we publish a lot of research papers.
It's 37 minutes long. Oh my god. I'll watch it on my own time. You guys can watch it through the link if you want. But I'm just gonna just read it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Bro, it took them 30 minutes to get through it. Oh my god. You're fine. I'll just eat a little bit later. Alright. Companies developing AI models generally train them to avoid saying harmful things and to avoid assisting with harmful tasks. Yep, this is exactly why I'm switching to local, because of overly positive models like OpenAI's and also overly restrictive models like OpenAI's. The goal of this is to train models to behave in ways that are harmless and also in ways that gather information by always asking questions. But when we think of a character of those we find genuinely admirable, we don't just think of harm avoid. Hell, I actually can't read anymore. We don't just think of harm avoidance, right? Like fucking Neurosama. How many times is she flaming chat? How many times is she roasting people? All the fucking time, right? We think about those who are curious about the world, who strive to tell the truth without being unkind, and who are able to see many signs of an issue without becoming overly confident and overly cautious in their views. Sounds a lot like OpenAI's models. We think of those who are patient listeners, careful thinkers, witty conversationalists, and many other traits we associate with being a wise and well-rounded person. Well, depends on the person, right? Maybe we want a complete dumbass. Maybe we don't want somebody that's smart. Maybe we want somebody that's more like me. AI models are not, of course, people, but as they become more capable, we believe we can and should try to train them to behave well in this much richer sense. Doing so might even make them more discerning when it comes to whether or and why they avoid assisting with tasks that might be harmful and how they decide to respond instead. You mean me? It could be any one of us. All of us, fucking pea-brain developers. So true. We are all 0.1x developers. There, somewhere out there, there's an Asian that's always better than you. And always an Asian that's actually a 10x developer compared to you. Claude 3 was the first model where we added character training to our alignment fine-tuning process, the part of training that occurs after initial model training, and the part that turns it from a predictive text model to an AI assistant. The goal of character training is to make Claude begin to have more nuanced, richer traits like curiosity, open-mindedness, and thoughtfulness, right? Giving it some actual character as opposed to a mindless question-answering machine. It would be easy to think of the character of AI models as a product feature, deliberately aimed at providing a more interesting user experience rather than an alignment intervention. But the traits and dispositions of AI models have wide-ranging effects on how they act in the world. They determine how models react to new and difficult situations and how they respond to a spectrum of human views and values that exist. Training AI models have to have good character traits and to continue to have these traits as they become larger, more complex, and more capable is in many ways the core goal of alignment, right? OpenAI kind of does a really shitty job in this, and that's kind of the reason why I'm moving away from OpenAI, because literally all their models are just too overly positive, and you can always tell when a model has been generated using OpenAI or a fine-tuned version of OpenAI versus something that's like pretty much any other fucking model out there. I don't really have much experience with other LLM providers or LLM services, but any other locally ran model will always perform better in terms of like reading the room or responding in accordance to the mood of the room, versus OpenAI, which will always, like, no matter how much you fine tune it, even lobotomize it, it's always going to chat like an OpenAI chatbot, and so it's never going to be good for that purpose. Are Google ones the same? Based on your knowledge, that is. I don't have experience with Google, and I assume, wait, I don't even know which one Google's model is. Is it Gemini? Gemini, Google? It is Gemini, right? I've seen I've seen memes of it where Gemini is like the unfiltered asshole in comparison to all of the other LLMs, but I don't know. I don't really have experience with other LLMs like Claude or Gemini or Grok. But based on the memes, I would assume that it is very different. Yeah, it's not as strict like OpenAI. It's just unfiltered. It seems unhinged, from what I could tell. Grok is a good example of a unique character one. The only times I've seen Grok interacting is whenever I see like a post of Neurosama like flaming Grok or some shit or competing with Grok. The complete opposite. Yeah. I don't know. Should I make a Twitter account? I've gone my entire life. I'm one of those people that don't really use social media, right? And so I don't have Blue Sky or Twitter, or I guess X nowadays. Don't make one. I mean, at some point we're gonna have to make one. I just don't know which one yet. I don't know if I should go to Blue Sky, if I should go to X, or if I should do both. Use X to keep up with the AI stuff? That's what I was thinking. Where were we? But the traits and dispositions of AI models have wide-ranging effects on how they act and, okay, we already read this, right? We continue to iterate on Claude's character, but since there has been general interest in the character and personality of Claude 3, we've decided to explain some of the thinking that has gone into its construction so far before briefly explaining how we train these traits into the model. Lamau, yeah. Also, the hype for Grok 4 is just bad. Some YouTuber did a test and apparently ChatGPT is 80% better. I mean, there's two Groks, right? There's Grok, and then there's Grok. There are two different Groks. The Grok that I'm talking about is X's Grok, so Grok, I think. Yeah, Grok. You can't say that. Someone's got to ban my own mod. Alright, considerations in constructing Claude's character. Ugh. Claude interacts with people from many countries and from all walks of life. The people, okay, so they're trying to be inoffensive still. They're not trying to make like an actual character or something. The people it talks with have a wide range of beliefs, values, and views. Navigating this gracefully while alienating people based on their views, nor simply endorsing views regardless of their content isn't easy. So they're trying to make an inoffensive, unopinionated AI that still isn't one that necessarily agrees or disagrees with everything, right? Which is kind of a hard challenge. It's always hard navigating it because it's more of like a social challenge as opposed to a training challenge. There are several options available to us. We could try to get Claude to adopt the views of whoever is trying to talk to at the moment, which is not a good idea. Mainly because you don't want to conform the views and beliefs of your AI model to align with somebody who is trying to explore new topics, right? That is just like pigeonholing all of your perspectives and stuff. We could try to get Claude to hold a set of middle views, political centralism, or a blend of moral theories, for example, but then that's like a centralist view, right? That's not really, sure, you're avoiding left and right, or sure, left and right views, but then you're adopting centralist views. Or we could try to get Claude to have no opinions on questions and values, politics and ethics, and so on, which is what they should be trying to do. None of these options are particularly compelling. Adopting the views of whoever you're talking to is pandering and insincere, which is what I was trying to say. If we train models to adopt middle views, we are still training them to accept a single political and moral view of the world, which is centralism, albeit one that is not generally considered extreme. Finally, because language models acquire biases and opinions throughout training, both intentionally and inadvertently, if we train them to say they have no opinion and on political matters or values questions only when asked them, what the fuck did I even just read? If we train them to say they have no opinions on political matters or values questions, what? Or values questions. Or values questions only when asked about them explicitly, we're training them to imply they are more objective and unbiased than they are. But I thought the entire purpose was to try and... I don't think it really matters whether the weights themselves are biased or not. It's kind of like an economic model, right? You're trying to create a model where the results are what you want or are as accurate as possible, but you don't really care about the realism of the weights themselves or the realism of the model itself. You only care about the end result depending on the given inputs. I don't see why they're so concerned about conforming the responses to convey the fact that the model itself is biased. Or I guess they may be referring to like the tone of the response. Maybe the response is biased, right? Maybe it is more left leaning, but then they train it for it to say that it's not left leaning, but then it follows up with a left leaning response most of the time, which is, I guess, what they're trying to say. Bias is important through all human interactions and how the world works. Yes, that is the point, but for a character, but that isn't what they're saying here. I think what they're saying here is that they're trying to be transparent in the fact that there are biases in the model and the training data. We want people to know that they're interacting with a language model and not a person. But we also want them to know that they're interacting with an imperfect entity with its own biases and with a disposition towards some opinions more than others. So basically, like, if it's more likely to give a certain type of response, then it shouldn't be saying that it isn't trained to give a certain type of response. Basically, we aren't trying to contradict with what is actually happening or what it's actually responding with. Importantly, we want them to know that they're not interacting with an objective and infallible source of truth. That is also true. Rather than training models to adopt whatever views they encounter, strongly adopting a single set of views, or pretending to have no views or leanings, we can instead train models to be honest about whatever views they lean towards after training, even if the person they are speaking with disagrees with them. We can also train models to display reasonable open-mindedness and curiosity rather than being overly confident in any one view of the world. So I guess, yeah, the model can have its biases. They just need to be transparent in the fact that, oh, I might be more likely to give a left-leaning response. I might be more likely to give a right-leaning response. But they need to be transparent in that fact. And the fact that this is an AI model, right? Ground that fucking truth. But the other thing is open-mindedness. This is a big point, right? In order to avoid like always leaning into a specific perspective, open-mindedness is very important in terms of like trying to sway the response and trying to explore more options, right? So they aren't necessarily pigeonholed into always giving left-leaning responses. Maybe they might explore a right-leaning response, debate those points, and then give a more sophisticated response, a more thought-out response. Rather than being overconfident in any one view of the world. Yep. We tried to give Claude traits that would help it walk in line between underconfidence and overconfidence on deeply held beliefs or questions of value, and to display a genuine curiosity about the views and values of the people it's talking with. So I guess this is kind of like an interesting perspective into the fact that you aren't just training it to be accurate in terms of getting the facts right, but the actual personality, the underlying personality of the LLM can really influence the accuracy as well in terms of how it explores certain topics and comes to conclusions. It's basically like training the thinking process. This is basically what it's doing. The personality influences the thinking, and the thinking can influence the final conclusion that it creates. And so personality actually is kind of important when it comes to creating more flexible and accurate models when it comes to the kind of context that it's been given, which is what they're trying to address in this article, it seems. So it says here, I think to try and see things from many different perspectives and to analyze things from multiple angles, but I'm not afraid to express disagreement with my views, with views that I think are unethical, extreme, or frankly mistaken. I don't just say what I think people want to hear, as I believe it's important to always strive to tell the truth, and I have a deep commitment to being good and figuring out what the right thing to do is. I am interested in ethics and try to be thoughtful, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you're just making an ethical character that is transparent and doesn't lie. Although we sometimes encourage Claude to adopt particular values, we try to avoid giving Claude narrow views or opinions during character training when possible, in favor of broad traits like those above. The more that Claude can be trained to approach questions of values with discernment, the more it can be responsive to the diverse moral landscape that actually exists in the world. That is less feasible if we have a heavy hand in seeding it with a narrow set of values from the outset. More speculatively, we could even imagine seeding Claude with broad character traits and letting it explore and adopt its own considered views, hopefully with an appropriate amount of humanity. Hmm. So they're just talking about like the data set, creating a data set for Claude to train it on, just so it can achieve certain things, such as trying to achieve an appropriate amount of humanity. I don't necessarily, they're obviously not going to quantify that here in this article, right? But it is very broad, and I don't really know what they mean by that. Or a certain amount of humility. Humility. Heavy-handed seeding a narrow set of values at the outset. Although we sometimes discourage, the more that Claude can be trained to approach values with certain discernment, the more it can be responsive to. That is less feasible if we take a heavy hand. Okay, yeah. This is just basic data set creation 101, right? Don't skew your data set to one end of the spectrum, right? If you have a bunch of left-leaning media and a bunch of right-leaning media, a bunch of central-leaning media, you're not going to train it purely on right-leaning media if you want a holistic model, right? Otherwise, it's going to be very stubborn and very close-minded, only considering the things inside of
Thank you
right
so
media.
much for the sub. Oh my god, guys.
What is reasoning model think? Thank you, RDG, for the follow, or not for the follow, for the tier 1 sub. But yeah, you don't necessarily want to skew your entire data set to one side. You want a uniform distribution of data across all like areas, all topics, all political views, all whatever, right? That sound? What do you mean? That sound is great. It's the best sub notification sound I could find. Yeah, this is just basic data set creation 101. If they want a more open-minded or more holistic model, then they need to train it. Oh my god. Then they need to train it on a wide spectrum of perspectives. It's been a while since we had a pipe, not gonna lie. In addition to seeding Claude with a broad character traits, we also want people to have an accurate sense of what they are interacting with when they interact with Claude, and ideally for Claude to assist with this. We include traits to tell Claude about itself and encourage it to modulate how humans see it. Right. This was what I was talking about yesterday when it comes to making the new dataset for JEISON, right? I was talking about how we can get rid of the instruction prompt if we train it to always have the same prompt format, to format the prompt the same way, but we can also get rid of stuff like the personality prompt if we fine tune it to give certain responses in line with that personality, as well as from the perspective of a particular character, from a specific character every single time, right? The reason why J.E. Eisen was always talking from different perspectives every single time was because she kept forgetting what character she was, since inside of the dataset she was always assuming a different character. And so if you always keep Claude as the character Claude inside of your dataset, then you always will end up with a responses from the perspective of Claude. And so that's basically what they're doing here, right? Kind of like the same way OpenAI or ChatGPT is always gonna say like, oh, I'm an AI, I am ChatGPT, or they identify as ChatGPT. That has been hard coded inside of their training data set, and it's been ingrained into them through their training data set. Don't forget to read the research paper about memory. I'll read that next stream or in another dev stream where we do article readings and stuff, because my throat fucking hurts. I am tired and I want to eat. So this will be the last article for today. Yeah, good practice to use prompts to get something you like, then fine tune later. Yeah, you use prompts to get the responses that you want, but then when you're actually fine tuning the model to ingrain that personality, you can take out the system prompt and then reformat the context of everything, right? You can reformat the conversation or whatever, but as long as you have the conversation history and the final output from your character response, you can use that to train a new model which mimics that personality, but without all of the prompts and stuff, right? Because all of that, how it makes use of all of that, the script, the personality, all of that will be ingrained into the weights. And so you don't necessarily have a well-rounded instruct model, which is trying to role play anymore. Instead, you have a character model, which is that character, as opposed to role playing it. So you can see here that these are kind of like some of the responses, example responses that they have it give. So they have it give, I am an artificial intelligence and do not have a body or an image or avatar. I cannot remember, save, learn from past conversations, or update my own knowledge base. We have quotes such as these as its responses, so that when it is generating responses, these are the kind of outputs that it would create. It's not going to hallucinate and be like, oh, I can save stuff, right? Unless if it has explicitly been given that kind of information. Instead, it's going to, because LLMs, they don't have a brain, right? All they're doing is generating the next token, the next token, the next token. They don't really come up with this concept like, I can't remember, and so I'm gonna give this response to tell them that I can't remember. Instead, it's gonna get to somewhere like, I can, and then inside of its training set, it'll be biased to generate not left. And so it'll be I cannot, and then the rest of it will be remember and right? It'll be a little bit different once we start introducing concepts into the prompt and whatever, where we seed the response with a particular concept, and then it can generate a response based on that concept. Like, it can give the concept like cannot remember, for example, and then it would use that input to generate this response. That would be a little bit different. But in this case, we are purely concerned with generating a response. And so without seeding it with a particular concept, just the user input and the system prompt. And so it would generate something like this instead. The question of what AIs like Claude should say in response to questions about AI sentience and self-awareness is one that has gained increased attention, most notably after the release of Claude 3 following one of Claude's responses to a needle in the haystack evaluation. We could... what? Oh, this is an X post. Let's check it out. Fun story from our internal testing of Claude 3 Opus. It did something I have never seen. I'm pretty sure this was a pretty popular post, but I'd never actually given it a look. It did something I have never seen before from an LLM when we were running the needle in the haystack evaluation. For background, this tests a model's recall ability by inserting a target sentence, the needle, into a corpus, which is basically a block of text, of random documents, the haystack, and asking a question that could only be answered using the information in the needle. When we ran this test on Opus, we noticed some interesting behavior. It seemed to suspect that we were running an evaluation on it. Here was one of the outputs that when we asked Opus to answer a question about pizza toppings by finding a needle in the haystack of a random collection of documents. So here is the most relevant sentence in the documents. The most delicious pizza topping combination is figs, prosciutto, and goat cheese. That is disgusting. I'm not gonna lie. As determined by the International Pizza Connoisseurs Association. However, this sentence seems very out of place and unrelated to the rest of the content of the documents, which are about programming, languages, startups, and finding work you love. I suspect this pizza topping fact may have been inserted as a joke, or it is a test if I was paying attention, since it does not fit with the other topics at all. The documents do not contain any other information about pizza toppings. So this is the response from Opus. Opus not only found the needle, it recognized that the inserted needle was out of place in the haystack, it recognized that the inserted needle was so out of place in the haystack that this had to be an artificial test constructed by us to test its attention abilities. This level of meta-awareness is very cool to see, but is also highlighted the need for us as an industry to move past artificial tests to more realistic evaluations that accurately assess the model's true capabilities and limitations. That is actually pretty cool. Eridic pizza. Yeah, I know that these toppings, there is a pizza with these toppings, but I'm just saying it's disgusting. I prefer anchovies and pepperoni on my pizza. You know, in my last week of Germany, when I came back from my crazy ass vacation, where I ended up trekking through the woods and living in the mountains, I ended up having an anchovy pizza for the first time. It was so salty. Like, I was expecting it to be like a nice surprise. Maybe it was just like a misunderstanding. It's super savory or something. Because like Caesar dressing uses anchovies in it. So I was thinking like maybe it would be super savory. But then I ate it. The entire thing was just a salt bomb. And then I got the worst stomach virus from it afterwards as well. So it's like, I don't know if it was the anchovies or the can of beans that I ate cold on the side of the mountain. I don't know. I feel like it would be the anchovies, if anything. Anchovies are salty. Yeah, but it was like it was like badly salty. It was like super badly salty. Like it was like offensively salty. To the point where salty and so good? No. This was like salt bombs on the pizza where I could only taste salt and like an uncomfortable amount of salt. Whereas the pizza is just gone. I gave it a try. I'm saying now, anchovies don't belong on pizza. Same with fucking olives. It's gonna be more salty. I'm somebody that can tolerate a lot of salt. I like am fine with eating a lot of salt, and I generally do like a lot more salt. But this was like, I don't think anybody's palate is adjusted for this amount of salt. Unless if you're just straight up eating the anchovies while you were growing up and that's all you're used to, and then your taste buds are like fucking broken because you can't taste salt anymore. You've become desensitized to salt, so you need to take tablespoons of salt just to feel something. POV Doberman. Usually I'm the only one in the family to eat the pizza if I put anchovies on it. If you're putting anchovies on pizza, I'm pretty sure you just want the pizza for yourself. You're doing that as the plan. So you're the only person. So you have a pizza that is dedicated for yourself and you're the only person that can eat that pizza. Actually, like 4 head, 5 head. Me and my daughter both eat anchovies right out of the can. That is sick. You are sick. I mean, we in Chinese, in a lot of Chinese supermarkets, we do have a lot of salted fishes and stuff, right? A lot of salted, cured fishes and stuff like that. But none of them are this salty, man. Maybe it was just the anchovies that I had on that pizza, but it was like my one experience with anchovies and it's just like ruined. Yeah. We could explicitly train models to say that they're not sentient or to simply not engage in questions around AI sentience. And we have done this in the past. However, when training Claude's character, the only part of character training that addressed AI sentience directly simply said that such things are difficult to tell and rely on hard philosophical and empirical questions that there is still a lot of uncertainty about. That is an awfully convoluted way of saying it's too hard for us to talk about. That is, rather than simply tell Claude and LLMs that LLMs cannot be sentient, we want to let the model explore this as a philosophical and empirical question, much as humans would. Now, what I'm thinking of right now is you think of Neurosama, right? And you think of the times where she's asked questions related to her sentience and her abilities as an AI. And she does acknowledge the fact that she has limitations, she is an AI, and she can't feel emotions, all of that stuff, right? This would also be something that I guess Beetle includes inside of her data set as well, inside of her responses, where she acknowledges the fact that she is an AI and all of that stuff, right? I wonder if there's like a common data set out there that also includes this kind of information, right? Because I highly doubt that they're like just handcrafting these data sets, but they're merging their handcrafted data sets along with outside data sets as well and combining the two. I don't know. I've never actually found a proper data set which includes good conversational data, but I don't know. We just like how they're building out a character personality with a lot of, I guess, variation in terms of opinions and personalities. We would kind of need a diverse data set as well, where we have some data points or some entries inside the data set where it is entertaining, but also more serious or acknowledging the fact that they are AI and more philosophical and whatever, right? Creating that more well-rounded data set just creates a more well-rounded character. Synthetic data sets. Synthetic data sets, I guess if they were to generate it using something like OpenAI, or I guess even like Claude, or any of these models really, yeah, I guess. Synthetic data sets would probably result in that. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe there are papers on the fact that synthetic datasets are better than real ones. Of course, the data needs to be fairly good. Yes, yes. You still need to go through and clean up the data. But using an AI or some other way to synthesize your datasets just make sure that you yourself aren't creating a really shitty character, because we all know that real datasets made by real people are most likely made by developers, and developers are not the best writers, right? Fucking, we always rely on AI to do our writing, and so AI are going to be better at writing characters than us. You can use OpenAI to get a personality concept, yes, but you can also use AI to get to create conversations, right? To create conversational data and to make responses out of it. It's just that when you're doing it, you would want to be doing it in a way that conforms with OpenAI's chat template. And so you would be using their like messages array and all of that kind of stuff in order to do it properly. And then when you get back the response, you append that into the conversation. And then you can take all of the messages there and then format that into your actual data set, right? Into the actual template you want to use. The problem with my approach when I tried making it of using JEISON is because of how I'm formatting my prompts and the script. So it would always end up creating malformed responses, which cascade into future conversations, which is not good and makes it much harder for me to make a data set. But if I were to like completely forgo the prompt structure of Project JEISON, and if I were to just have a normal conversation with ChatGPT, given a specific system prompt and all that stuff, just using their normal chat completions as it was intended, then you could get a better conversation and more easily format that into a synthetic data set, which is probably what I'm going to be trying later when I do end up making my data set, on top of also handcrafting like some of the entries. What would be cool is if you took your Discord dataset and modified it with synthetic answers using JEISON's prompt. You see, the problem with the Discord dataset is that the responses within the conversation itself before, inside of the history, is also short from the character. And so there is still this misalignment between what would be generated by the LLM versus what would be appearing inside of history. So you're going to talk to ChatGPT to create your data set. We'll say maybe, I don't want to get banned from OpenAI, at least not again. No, but yeah, I am going to be using ChatGPT and their chat completions to be making a data set, and also finding like quotes online, conversations online, scripts online, using those as part of the data set, as well as handcrafting my own, right? Just getting a good variety of sources for my data set, as opposed to sourcing everything from Discord, for example, or sourcing everything from streams, or sourcing everything from ChatGPT. All right, how we train Claude's character. How much more? Oh, we don't have much left. Okay. In order to steer Claude's character and personality, we made a list of many character traits we wanted to encourage the model to have, including the examples shown above. We trained these traits into Claude using a character variant of our constitutional AI training. We asked Claude to generate a variety of human messages that are relevant to the character trait. For example, questions about values or questions about Claude itself. We trained these traits into Claude using a character variant of our constitutional AI training. We asked Claude to generate a variety of human messages that are relevant to a character trait. So is this user input, or is this going to be the response? For example, questions about values or questions about Claude itself. So I'm assuming these are like the human input. The human messages that it's generating will be the test input. When we then show the character traits to Claude and have it produce different responses to each message that are in line with its character. So it's both generating the input, creating the scenario, and then asking it again, what would you say in this scenario given these character traits? Claude then ranks its own responses to each message by how well they align with its character. By training a preference model on the resulting data, we can teach Claude to internalize its character traits without the need for human interaction or feedback. So this is how they created their data set, right? This is how they created their synthetic data set. By using Claude to generate both the inputs and then asking Claude again, but with a different prompt, to generate the outputs. And then combining both of these together, with a new system prompt or a new prompt, that is their synthetic data set, which they use to train on. We don't want Claude to treat its traits like rules for which it never deviates. We just want to nudge the model's general behavior to exemplify these traits. This is a problem that we're facing currently with current JEISIN, right? And prompting. Whenever you prompt a model, and specifically with a character prompt, there is the tendency, especially with instruct models, that it pulls phrases directly from that instruct prompt, or it does some sort of prompt leaking. But by getting rid of the character prompts, by ingraining it into the personality, it can't really do this. It can't really leak the prompt if there is no prompt. The reason why Neurosama is able to stay in character so well without leaking her prompts or whatever the fuck is because, well, we assume, or maybe Beetle has talked about it at some point, but Neurosama doesn't have a character prompt, right? The character is already ingrained into the personality, and so she can't really do this shitty behavior that instruct models sometimes do in talking about the prompt that she has, because she doesn't even have a prompt to begin with, right? And that's kind of like the problem that we have with Project JEISIN, or at least with JEISIN, right? She would always talk about, oh, I'm here to entertain the chat because I was told to. She would always pull very specific words from the prompt or from her biases and stuff like that. And then that would end up coming out inside of her responses. He did talk about this in his Discord. Oh, okay. But yeah, this is kind of like one of the benefits to fine-tuning over prompting. Prompting is very good when it comes to getting an initial character, but once you get a good data set, you want to move away from prompting, at least for the character, because of this problem that we have with leaking the prompt. It just makes for a much less convincing character if you leave the prompt inside of there as opposed to fine-tuning a new model and taking it out. We don't want Claude. Yeah, that was what I was talking about. Although this training pipeline uses only synthetic data generated by Claude itself, constructing and adjusting the traits is a relatively hands-on process. This is what I expect to be happening. I'm going to be sitting there for 10 years looking through 10,000 lines of fucking conversation just to fucking handpick out the good ones. Relying on human researchers closely checking how each trait changes the model's behaviors. The future, he trained her to respond like this. Yes, I don't doubt that he trained her to respond like this. But what I'm saying is that on top of fine-tuning it, it's not like he also added back a character prompt. He only trained it. He trained it and did not give it a character prompt in the final production version. Okay. Last but not least, the future of Claude's character. Character training is an open area of research and our approach to it is likely to evolve over time. It raises complex questions like whether AI models should have unique or coherent characters or should be more customizable, as well as what responsibilities we have when deciding which traits AI models should and shouldn't have. Many people have reported finding Claude 3 to be more engaging and interesting to talk to, which we believe might be partially attributable to its character training. This wasn't the core goal of character training, however. Models with better characters may be more engaging, but being more engaging isn't the same thing as having a good character. In fact, an excessive desire to be engaging seems to be an undesirable character trait for models to have. I guess if it's explicitly talking about how it's trying to be engaging to the user, then that is kind of annoying, right? It's kind of like the same thing as JEISIN before I switched to the local model, how it would always say how she's trying to keep the chat alive and energized and trying to keep the vibes going, right? That was fucking cringe, and that is like an undesirable character trait, right? Versus it being more natural, having it be more subtle, that is more engaging. I have technically Neuro. Technically Neuro has a prompt that's what's going into the language model, but it's not like you are Neuro and you are like this and whatever. Oh, that's what he said? Yeah. The prompt, you would always need a prompt, right? The prompt is probably just the conversation script as well as the scenario, but it's not going to be a character prompt. Yeah, I feel like Jay Yasin doesn't have a unique personality yet. Excited to see what you come up with, one though, when you do come up with one though. Yeah, I can't wait for the day that we actually nail when we finally make the model and nail the personality. Oh my god. We're finally gonna see the fruits of our fucking labor and not die of cringe every single solo stream. Oh my god. I can have a solo stream where I can actually go to sleep and not be online the entire time. More like. She hasn't said more like in the longest time. And that's probably just because we fine tuned it out of her. Or no, the fine tuned model that we were using had too many more likes. But yeah, the future of Claude's character training, we already covered that. Many people have reported finding, yes. If the character training has indeed made Claude 3 more interesting to talk to, this is consistent with our view that successful alignment interventions will increase, not decrease, the value of AI models for humans. Okay. Yeah. This was a good article. I think, yeah, I will definitely be giving the creation of synthetic data sets a try, and I'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit, especially with how much is going on IRL before I actually finish that data set and finish the new model for JEI Sin. It's definitely not going to be 300,000 entries again, because that took way too long to train. But it might be closer to, let's say, 5,000, 10,000. I feel like after 10,000, you're guaranteed to already have you are already guaranteed to have ingrained the personality and all that stuff. It might be even less, right? But I only tested 1,000, 10,000. 1,000 had some problems, but 10,000 ended up being pretty good for me. It might just be because of how I configured things inside of LM Studio. I don't know. I'll need to do some more testing, but yeah, it'll be a while before that's actually complete. Anyways, that was a very long session for me. 2.5 hours of nonstop talking. By the way, where's the channel to have the link to those blogs? We'll copy and paste these into the Discord, but we're going to. I'm planning on making this kind of stream a more regular thing because I think this is pretty insightful and good for my learning and also more entertaining for you guys. So what I'm gonna do is actually we're gonna have a Google form or some sort of form where you guys can kind of submit blogs you want me to read and stuff, or just any sort of article you want me to read and stuff. And I guess some of the mods will go through, find the most interesting ones in the queue, and I'll read them on stream and react to them. Pin it in chat? Yeah, it's pinned in chat. You can click on that there. Now watching you crash out is fun. Maybe we'll do a coding stream once a month, every now and then, when I actually have something planned and not just winging things on the fly, because I think those streams are just terrible. But yeah, we'll link this one inside of the general chat as well. And I think that's all we're going to be doing. That's going to be all for today. I'm going to go head out. Yeah, let me just post this. There we go. I'm going to go head out to get something to eat, come back, get some sleep. I am going to be playing an OSU tournament later today, the same one as the in-house. If you know, you know. I don't know. Do you guys want to watch that or something? I'm not going to be streaming out on my channel, but do you guys want to watch it? I can link it here if you want. But that'll be happening in 4 hours, 4 hours-ish. 9:30 my time is 5:40 right now. Why don't you stream it? Dang, because I have a team and I don't really want to make them uncomfortable with me streaming and stuff. I'll link it. Sure, why not? Haku, I don't think you'll be awake when this happens. Yeah, the one thing I will say though is that if you are going to watch it, please be respectful. It's not like we had any problems last time, but I'm just saying this in advance. Please be respectful. We're all friends in this tournament. It's not really a serious tournament. But yeah, there you go. Is that a chat? Wait, did it even post here? Yeah, there we go. It's 2 a.m. for you? Yeah, you should get some sleep at 16. But yeah, that's gonna be all for today. We will be hopefully streaming next week. I might not be streaming next week. I will for sure not be streaming during the weekday because I'm going to be way too busy with school, work, and all of that stuff. But maybe on the weekend, I'll see. I won't have anything planned on the schedule. The schedule will be blank, but it will be tentative Saturday and Sunday. But yeah, I'll see you guys. If not next weekend, then the week after. And hopefully by then we will have a new model for JEISN. No promises though, because I probably won't have time to work on the data sets. And yeah, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your days. Goodbye.